Hello and welcome to another edition of Gabe and Zav's film review show, My Dinner with Gabe, in which we review films and talk to film personalities and discuss film topics related to the city of Milwaukee and some not related to the city of Milwaukee. So there. I'm Gabe Van Handel.
And I'm Zav LaPlay.
Hello. And this is another show. Today we are going to be discussing Orson Welles with Mark Borchardt, the one and only Mark Borchardt, the Milwaukee film celebrity who was epitomized in the film
American Movie,
which is directed by Chris Smith, in which Mark became somewhat of a international and
very locally very well known.
Locally very well known and nationally known as sort of a
all-American
guy.
All-American,
very eccentric, very funny, and very fiercely intelligent and independent and motivated filmmaker and mind/personality. Anyway, I'm going to start you off with some box office and movie news. How about that? Last weekend, and this was a 6-day weekend because we had an early opening. Spider-Man opened early, and here we go. Spider-Man, just over the weekend, not including the other days, pulled in $62 million. Ted was second with a strong second weekend with $32 million. Brave was third with $19 million. Savages was fourth with 16, and not so bad, a not so great opening. Magic Mike was fifth with $15 million. Tyler Perry's Medea's Witness Protection was sixth with $10 million. Madagascar 3 was 7th with $7.5 million. Katy Perry opened to a very disappointing, though I don't really understand why it's so disappointing. This is still a lot of money. Opened 8th with $7 million. And Moonrise Kingdom 9th with $4.5 million. Strong money for that sleeper hit. And To Rome with Love, Woody Allen's latest, $3.1 million, rising up quickly through the independent theater echelon to become another sleeper hit of the summer, as was last year's
Midnight in Paris.
Thank you, which was a great film.
Yeah.
So, my analysis of this was that Spider-Man didn't do amazing business, but it did pretty expectedly good business. Pulled in 137 for the 6-day total, which was high when compared to Batman Begins $79 million, or X-Men First Class's $69 million, which was extremely disappointing, but low when compared to Transformers' phenomenal opening of 155, which led to even bigger numbers throughout the series. And within its own franchise, Spider-Man originally opened 144 within the same weekend, within a May slotted, very powerful opening weekend. And Spider-Man 2 with 180 million, Spider-Man 3 with 176 million. So this is a little disappointing. Not surprising, since this is seemingly to a lot of people unnecessary series reboot, but to others a return to form and a focus more on the themes explored in the comic book. It's doing modestly good. It's relying on strong, older word of mouth, which is the primary audience so far. And it hopefully won't be crushed under The Dark Knight Rises, which could happen. Savages, opening fourth, did decent, not terrible, but better than some analysts expected, considering that it has fierce competition this weekend. And it's R-rated with a lot of strong violence in it, which sometimes is a turnoff at the box office. It did not do as good as other R-rated, strong violence R-rated features such as The Town, which opened to $23 million, or Contraband, which opened in January to $24 million. Surprisingly, for Savages, the audience was mainly older and female. This was unexpected. It had a really bad cinema score, though, of a C+, which is not a terrible grade by high school standards, but by cinema score averages and word-of-mouth standards, that's terrible. Internet could scathe this movie. It could bring it down. We'll see what happens next weekend. Oliver Stone has returned, but maybe he's not back. Part of me, the Katy Perry documentary, was a flop considering other superstar music personality documentaries that'll come out of late. Justin Bieber opening up by the same studio, actually, doing an almost mirrored style of documentary with $29.5 million compared to Katy Perry's $7 million opening. And considering over the 6-day weekend, she only pulled in an additional $3 million. Not great revenue. Michael Jackson's This Is It only pulled in $23 million. Even the Jonas Brothers concert, which was released in 3D and in very limited release, with $12.5 million in only half the locations that this movie was. It's kind of defying expectations. On the other hand, she is not nearly as popular as Michael Jackson or Justin Bieber, and doesn't have as much kiddie appeal as the Jonas Brothers did. Personally, I like Katy Perry.
Did you say titty appeal or kitty appeal?
Kitty.
Oh, okay.
She does have that too, though. 1 second.
Wow. Gabe, get a hold of yourself.
Bless me. Opening this week, Friday the 13th of July. There is no Friday the 13th movie opening, thank God. But Ice Age Continental Drift is opening. I'm not going to waste too much of your time with this. Lame, tired, here we go again. If you've seen the other Ice Age movies, you might see this one. You might not. I don't really care. No one else seems to care. Take your kids. They'll love it. Tired, boring, lame.
Are you going to take your daughter?
No. She's too young to watch a movie, and if she did, I would cover her eyes to spare her from this type of...
That's what you say now.
Hey, I'd rather take her to Madagascar. Rather take her to Madagascar 3, and I'd much rather take her to Brave, which, as I stated in an earlier show, is also a somewhat boring and a less fervid attempt from Pixar. Anyway, Red Light's also open, which is a film I was really looking forward to, and it's just gotten slayed by critics. The premise, two psychics and or like faith healer disprovers, people who are just out to burst everyone's bubble, find a turn against their favor when Robert De Niro, who is a blind psychic, comes out of retirement. And games are played, minds and plots are bended, twists are turned. Duh, who cares? Predictable. A mess, a preposterous, incoherent mess. A great premise, apparently horrible would-be arty execution. Who knows? It could be good. I could be wrong. Go see it. If you want to see it, go see it. I'm not stopping you. I'm not stopping you. Other film news. Margaret, the long-awaited film from Kenneth Lonergan, the auteur who is a great theater director, but also made the great and underrated You Can Count on Me, has finally released his director's cut of Margaret, starring Anna Paquin and a host of other great actors. It's a film about a young girl living in a confused state, dealing with guilt and all sorts of other young, angsty emotions. I haven't seen this movie yet, but they've been waiting. This movie has been... The studio has been waiting for Lonergan to finish his cut for literally years. This was slated for release years ago. This went to this went to festivals in an unfinished cut. And there's been dispute between the filmmaker and the studio, and finally it's finished. It's here. It's on video. Not that anyone really knows about it, but it's there. Ernest Borgnine died at 95. Honestly, I didn't know he was still alive, but he died, and he's a great actor, a great presence, and a great man.
Andy. What's his name?
Rooney?
No. I can't believe it. Andy Griffith.
Andy Griffith died?
Yeah, he died last week, I think.
Did not know about that.
Yeah.
Andy Griffith is dead. I'm sorry.
So yeah, watch Face in the Crowd.
Fans of A Face in the Crowd. I'm sorry, he's gone.
Yeah.
One of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah.
Great film about us. Richard D. Zanuck, son of the legendary, also a legendary producer, but son of the even more legendary producer, Daryl Zanuck, is dead. He's a guy who's produced many, many hits, smaller films as well, but most notably Jaws.
And just in... the son of Sylvester Stallone,
and the son of Sylvester Stallone just died unexpectedly.
That's more kind of... I don't know if he was involved in the film industry.
Not really. He was in Rocky V. Comic-Con is on its second day. It's rolling. It's going. I don't really know much about it other than the Django Unchained is there. The Expendables 2 is there. The Hobbit. That's the big movie there. That's there. Everyone wants a piece of that. And Looper is being shown there. I'm kind of interested in that film, even though I'm sure it'll turn out to be a lame brain kind of half-assed
And
movie.
speaking of Django Unchained, are we going to go see that with Robert Amanqua? for our Robert Amanqua show?
Well, if we do a show with him around Christmas time, sure.
Oh, it's not coming out
It's
this
not
week?
coming out till December.
Shoot. Oh, too bad. Oh, well.
Sorry, dude.
We'll review the other Django stuff.
Django.
Yeah.
Have you always walked alone? And that is your box office and movie news for this week. So there.
Okay, and here comes my soliloquy.
So we are changing things up a little bit this week. In that, we are going to do individual reviews that we are not just winging. We are writing and scripting, and we're going to see how we like it and how you like it.
So this weekend I went to see, this yesterday or the day before, I went with Elmo to, we were going to go see Spider-Man, and on the way to Spider-Man, I decided, wait a second, Elmo doesn't even like Spider-Man, and instead we're going to go to the Budget Cinema and just see what's there. And we went to the Budget, and there was a few different films. Elmo, for some crazy reason, wanted to watch The Artist again, which is kind of amazing, because since it's a black and white silent film, it's pretty amazing for a kid who, any kid these days, to watch a black and white silent film. But I went and saw Sacha Baron Cohen's film, The Director, and so here's my... The Dictator, sorry. And so here's my sort of spiel about it. My initial reaction to the previews for Sacha Baron Cohen's most recent film, The Dictator, was that it promised to be perhaps one of the funniest films of the year. I love the premise, the look, the jokes. For those who don't know, it's a film about the dictator of a small country in Africa called Wadiya, who bears an uncanny resemblance to Muammar Gaddafi in both appearance and lifestyle. So I was sad to hear reports coming back that it was his least successful achievement to date. I know a lot of people can't stand his ruthless brand of humor on the level of Jackass and South Park. Unfortunately, I've found there's no hope for people who are put off by this type of humor. People like Sacha Baron Cohen don't give you much to defend him by. Either you trust where he's going with his jokes or not. Cohen is a little like a monstrous dictator himself, in that he seems to have very nearly no regard for social mores and brazenly chops through one taboo after another. For this reason, I think he's especially well suited for channeling the mind of a megalomaniac. Oddly enough, the closest film to echo The Dictator for me is one of my favorite films made in 1974 called General Idi Amin Dada, A Self-Portrait, directed by French filmmaker Barbet Schroeder. A frighteningly intimate verite documentary about the infamous Ugandan dictator Idi Amin. And yet, it is not without laughter. I wouldn't be surprised if the oddest scene in that film, where Idi Amin beats his friends at a swimming competition by pushing their heads underwater in order to swim past them, wasn't inspiration for the scene where Cohen's dictator General Shabazz al-Din wins competitions in track and field by shooting his competitors and winning many gold medals. I've come to accept that when I go to a movie with low expectations, I'm sometimes pleasantly surprised, and when I go to a movie with high expectations, I'm often disappointed. So I guess I'm glad that The Dictator got panned in the offset, because I was surprised at how much joy the film gave me. Maybe I wouldn't have felt as happy if I went into it with too high expectations. I like films made by liberals making fun of liberals, while at the same time making just as much fun of everyone else along the way. His film tells a tale not only about how horrible people like Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein are, but also how awful and stupid the CEOs of major oil corporations and the heads of Western nations are, not to mention how foolish even the anti-war activists can be, and as a matter of fact, the American public in general. On the downside, somehow this comedy seemed to be able to work in the same sorts of gnarly sex jokes every 5 minutes, and occasionally it does get to a point of senseless crassness, even for my tastes. I also have to admit there was something choppy about the comedy, especially the scenes between Cohen and John C. Reilly. I felt like the chemistry wasn't there. No one could... Oh my gosh, my screen just disappeared. One could see how the jokes worked on paper but failed on screen time and time again throughout the film. I think people might be right that this may be Cohen's least successful film to date, but that isn't necessarily bad in light of his other hugely successful undertakings, the Ali G series, Bo Rat, and the not as successful Bruno. The Dictator is still very funny, but perhaps not quite as funny because Cohen has forayed into classical narrative filmmaking and away from building narrative out of real-life documentary spoofs, which is how he made his mark in the world in the first place. Unfortunately for Cohen, that may be where his strongest talent lies, and attempting to move away from it may prove harder to be successful at than he hopes. I am a very politically minded critic of culture. So when Baron Cohen's Dictator delivers a heart-wrenching appeal for dictatorship against democracy, I found I was the only person in the theater to laugh out loud. And when he described the benefits of a dictatorship as a thinly veiled description of American and British society today, I nearly cried. Here's a clip from that speech, which to me was the most telling moment of the film. Funny enough, I had to search through dozens of clips, only to find this one single clip, which had 75 views on it, and is clearly a bootleg version off of a video screen. And I'll find that video for you now. The reason why I think that's interesting is because it goes to show, and also my experience in the budget cinema, that somehow the most resonant part of Sacha Baron Cohen's film seems to be something that kind of eluded a lot of the audience. So here it goes.
Lost on them, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of lost on most people. So here's the clip, and it's interesting too because this clip sort of finds itself more in the political realm of YouTube and Google videos, and it's called "An Honest Clip from the Dictator."
Oh, be quiet. Why are you guys so anti-dictators? Imagine if America was a dictatorship. You could let 1% of the people have all the nation's wealth. You could help your rich friends get richer by cutting their taxes and bailing them out when they gamble and lose. You could ignore the needs of the poor for healthcare and education. Your media would appear free, but would secretly be controlled by one person and his family. You could wiretap phones. You could torture foreign prisoners. You could have rigged elections. You could lie about why you go to war. You could fill your prisons with one particular racial group, and no one would complain. You could use the media to scare the people into supporting policies that are against their interests. I know this is hard for you Americans to, but please try. I will tell you what democracy is.
And then it gets cut off there.
Yep. So, very good reviews, Av.
Thank you. Based on my review, do you think you'll go see The Dictator, Gabe?
Yes, I really want to watch it now. I based on the reviews that I read about it, I actually wasn't that psyched to see it. But your review has sort of renewed my faith in Baron Cohen, who he's sort of like South Park, even though there's dull moments and there's stupid moments and there's lame moments and there's slow moments and there's stuff that I'm like, why is this in here? This is so uncomfortable and it doesn't work and this is disjointed. There's so much brilliance that comes through, that shines through, that and the fact that he's dead on and right on with pretty much 90% of his observations, it's worth it. I'm really glad that you restored my faith. I definitely should have seen this movie and will see this movie. So
what are the films you watched this week?
I saw We Need to Talk About Kevin and God Bless America. God Bless America is Bobcat Goldthwait's new movie, which is a satire on American television and American culture, which is about how stupid it basically his attack on a television all-consuming culture. But I am going to review We Need to Talk About Kevin first, and here is a clip in which Tilda Swinton and John C. Reilly wait in a hospital waiting room while their daughter, their younger child, is getting treated in the ER apparently for being poisoned. Tilda Swinton is pretty sure that there's an ominous tone to the scene. She's pretty sure that her older son, who she's convinced is evil, and the film makes it pretty clear that he is from birth, that he poisoned their daughter, while John C. Reilly is the husband. And
So you're going to start with a clip?
Here's that clip, followed by my review.
Why did you leave the drain stuff out?
I didn't. I put it away.
Then how did it get out?
It was Kevin. Kevin did it.
You need to go talk to someone.
That's John C. Reilly verbally dismissing Tilda Swinton for her fears about a son whom she knows to be psychotic and deranged, whom she has known to be a bad seed since birth. More so, John C. Reilly is seemingly punishing her for putting up with life, which seems to be in every scene of Lynn Ramsey's unrelenting, stirring, chaotic, scary, and yes, uneven film. We need to talk about Kevin. The film is nonlinear, often bleeding 15 or 5 years in the matter of a simple cut, often effortlessly. The length of her hair, the telltale symbol of which time period we're living in, or what emotional violence is more readily at hand, and what likely red liquid we're going to encounter. It's not always blood. It's usually something more telling, symbolic, but equally nauseating. It's a disjointing odyssey, one that isn't always rewarding, but the film isn't about riches. It's about picking up the pieces and reveling in shit, even when you haven't broken anything, and no one believes that you're picking up their shit and have spent a lifetime doing it. The film chooses sparse, odd, awkward moments to focus on the fallacy of the American dream, and finds a horrifying subject in Swinton's son, the title character Kevin, who at some point in the latter end of the timeline of events goes on a killing spree. No spoilers there, as everything is laid out in the first 20 minutes, from birth to prison, from pride and passion to horror and hatred. It gets tedious, it gets a little boring, but there is always a lurking, unsettling discomfort which never lets you look away. And Swinton, such an alive and uncomfortable actress, can elicit years of feeling, or lack of feeling, in a second of wordless action. John C. Reilly, as the unknowing optimist doofus of a husband, never sees what is right under his nose. A demon, a generation, a nightmare. Ramsey's film is full of daunting warnings, but to what purpose? She might be saying less about school killings and more about what's truly horrifying. The appearance of our lives and how little we can live in them. The film is loaded with settings polished and cleaned with fake smiles and underlying quiet resentments, when suddenly soaked in blood, either remembered, imagined, displaced, or real, all in a hallucinogenic, red-washed palette that dives further and further into Tilda Swinton's day-to-day madness and loss, though no days are ever fully beginning or ending. A truly remarkable, shocking, depressing film, and a great piece of casting. The aging of Kevin is maybe the most remarkable use of chronological child casting I've ever seen. And his emotional and physical resemblance to Tilda Swinton is at times enough to sustain brooding, unpleasant scenes that are reliant on art house sensibilities. It's a good thing that those senses come across pretty damn well throughout the whole film. That is my review of We Need to Talk About Kevin.
Which is out on DVD now.
DVD, it just came out recently, and it's a hell of a movie.
So you liked it?
I loved it. I thought it was a masterpiece. I thought it was an absolute masterpiece. A flawed masterpiece, but necessary. And I thought it raised a lot of important questions. And I thought that it was sort of an interesting piece. And any movie with school shootings in it automatically becomes a topic of discussion. It automatically is a red flag. This film had so little to do with the school shootings and so much to do with the emotional violence about everything else, resulting in the culture that allows these, that basically provokes this to happen.
Yeah.
But also, it's also a personal horror film that, on one half, this film is a social commentary about the lives we live in, the way the way the family structure is created in America, but it's also just about personal madness. And I just thought it was a hugely, just a really scary movie that was really unnerving. I really liked it a lot, even when it was a little boring.
We need to talk about Gabe.
Yeah. So another movie I'm going to review is God Bless America, which is Bobcat Goldthwait's new movie, which I gave you a little synopsis of before. And here is a clip from that in which he confronts a girl getting into her car, and he proceeds to lock her in the car and set her gas tank on fire. The device which she is using to blow her car up falls, and he swears, and it's kind of a comical scene, but except it's not funny. And he decides to just shoot her instead in front of her friends, runs away, and his future sidekick stands there and watches. And then I will get into my review.
You know, when you talk about...
Don't move and don't make a sound.
If you want the car, just take it. My parents got me the wrong one anyways.
Yeah, that's a fucking tragedy.
What are you doing? Help! Help! Help!
So the rag just fell.
Yeah, describe what we're seeing here.
So the rag just fell, and it's supposed to blow up the car. He's walking away all cool, trying to smoke a cigarette, and it didn't work. He's not looking cool. Her friend's here, and now he just shot her in the head. There's blood everywhere. It's not funny.
Wow.
It's supposed to be funny.
Did you just kill Chloe? Awesome.
And that is his future partner in crime, who is the outsider student who just witnessed. Now here is my film review. That's Frank, the main character in Bobcat Goldthwait's God Bless America, killing a teenager who has become a star in reality television by screaming about loud, stupid teenager things on your TV. Apparently making everyone dumber and stupider for having watched her do what spoiled girls do. Whine. All while his teenage, soon-to-be partner in execution after execution, Roxy, watches on joyfully. It's supposed to be exhilarating to watch Frank kill her, this screaming hellion who is so against the grain of what Frank is supposed to represent. As far as I can tell, forward-thinking, honest, accepting liberal values. But it doesn't. Most of the film comes across as whiny. Long, angry, one-sided, self-absorbed, all-hating, basically a fearful teenage rant. A half-baked piece on how terrible we as Americans are for watching television that makes us dumber, angrier, and more selfish. Yet that's the only feelings I got about this movie, this would-be satire. With so much material on television to scathingly lobotomize, and admittedly there are a few channel surfing scenes in this film that hit specific programs on the head hilariously and perfectly, but they're short moments. It's weird that the movie never finds its focus. It remains unbalanced in silliness, which unintentionally continues, even unnervingly, throughout several overly serious soapbox sermons on us, the TV zombies. Goldthwait follows Frank as he discovers that maybe killing these terrible demigods of broadcast and cable television is more important than just taking himself out of the cruel irony upon obvious irony without wit-clad culture that we are immersed in. However, it never asks bigger questions or makes deeper observations. If Frank is so astute and observant in his hating of what he sees, is he not what his rants and killings are centered around? A fat, impotent culture condemning what they in fact endorse through their behavior and actions? Why does he even watch television or care what's on television? What makes him a knight in devil's robes? Why is he worthy? His life is full of selfish idiots who do the wrong thing while he takes the kick in the ass for it. Whoa. Holy crap. Really? You mean life kind of sucks sometimes? Or all the time once in a while? Whoa. Stop the presses. Stop the presses. And he loses his job. Oh my God. Get this. His ex-wife is an idiot. His kid is an ungrateful brat who hates him. These are plot points that are so overused, it's disgusting. I don't even want to go on with them. The girl he likes... Okay, I will. The girl he likes even turns out to be a bitch. So you should kill yourself, but maybe have a blast taking out a bunch of people on television that you decided to watch, that you spent your miserable white middle-class American time watching? Where is the unreasonable punishment against Frank exactly? So Frank stops, awkwardly I might mention, to go on culture rants pretty much throughout the entire film to either people who are so one-dimensionally idiotic it wouldn't make sense to say these ramblings even to yourself in their company, or to his annoyingly, endlessly, I'm so misunderstood and friendless but cute, but so original, etc., teenage girl sidekick who obviously agrees with him already. The formula got old really fast. Either way, Frank sounds pretty whiny, and his observations never go beyond the absolute obvious, sounding like any intelligent loner high school student who is alienated for their hatred of non sequitur after non sequitur humor on Family Guy, or the roves of people tuning in to watch people essentially do nothing special. It turns out that that's what happens to this movie. It becomes nothing special. Despite an energetic and fervent opening third that could have really propelled a riveting, dissecting turn on itself last third, if only it were the slightest bit aware of the cutesy ironies it gleefully throws around, while stating that such entertainment is at the same time for the drone masses in one breath. It's absolute hypocrisy. Despite all this, it has fierce moments that I agreed with socially. Its tone, however, is inconsistent, uneventful. Things happen, but interesting or important aren't adjectives I would use to describe them. It's as if Bobcat had a great thing in his imagination that just never came together with any of the senses or intuition required to make an engaging film.
Oh, I know how that feels.
Aw. Yeah, and just don't worry, man. Like, it's my whole gang. Right.
So, I was going to say, that reminds me, I kind of stepped on your clip that you were playing because it immediately made me think of something I never said about the Oliver Stone film. What was the name of that film?
Savages.
Savages. Yes, Savage. It was actually one of the best things about the film, but also just kind of interesting, is that they combined violence and humor. Mm-hmm. And I just noticed that you were making a comment about that. But we shouldn't go on too long because we got to get on to Mark Borchardt. But
Action or art? Action or art?
Okay, so now we're gonna go. On that note, we're gonna go to our interview that we did earlier tonight at 7 p.m. In the studio downstairs with Mark Borchardt. Should I just let it rip?
Well, it's about Orson Welles, and we had to do it on a reel-to-reel players, and I love the sound of reel-to-reel, so hopefully there's
some of that comes across to you.
Some of that comes across to you.
Some of that analog feeling.
Enjoy.
Okay, bye.
We're joined today by Mark Borchardt, and we are discussing the career and life of Orson Welles. And Mark, you are by far the leading expert in the city that I know about the life, career, and artistic works of Orson Welles. So,
may I interrupt, Gabe, because that accolade runs smooth like some very honeyed gravy. I certainly won't agree with you, but I think your kindness is sincere, and it is certainly overwhelming, and thank you for that magnificent introduction.
Absolutely. So, Orson Welles, a profound performer, considered by some to be the greatest filmmaker of the 20th century, maybe the greatest filmmaker ever, a great improviser in theater, a great improviser and complete revolutionary in the form in radio broadcast. What are your thoughts on Orson Welles as a performer?
Well, it's not so much as an improviser, but an impresario, or however you say that.
Sure.
He's certainly the master of ceremonies, and I think that's how he conducted his entire life, and in life and in his career, as being the MC of it all, the grand MC of it all. What was your question, Gabe?
What are your thoughts on his career as a whole? Just to sum it up to someone who knows nothing about Orson Welles, or someone who has no idea who Orson Welles is, how would you define Orson Welles?
Orson Welles, I think, was this huge imaginative force in the theater, on radio, and in film. And one of the false conceits is that he had destroyed his career. And without, we'll get into that, but it was because of his falling out from Hollywood that he went ahead and did his own individual innovative projects, and had he stayed in a more rigid system, we wouldn't have his these films such as The Trial and certainly Othello, which he did on his own. These wouldn't exist without that being ousted from that system.
So
So for those who are unfamiliar with Orson Welles' work, he's the director of Citizen Kane, which is listed in many polls and is cited by many film historians and many film critics to be the greatest film ever made and to be the greatest achievement in filmmaking of all time. Many scholars agree with this, and there's some people that contest it, but also cannot dispute the fact that this movie broke boundaries in cinema that had not been done in this, that this is a mountain of a film in filmmaking and in storytelling. And this was his first feature film. There's also disputes about how he came into filmmaking with RKO Pictures. But the greater story is where it went afterwards. He being a child of the school of broken cinema, in that many of his films are considered to be incomplete or slaughtered by studio heads afterwards, or by editors afterwards, or by many of the constraints of the studio system, which eventually led to him being an outsider and led to him making very truly independent works of art, such as Touch of Evil, The Trial, and F is for Fake, which could not have been made earlier in his career under the constraints of the studio system at the time. What are your opinions on Orson within the studio system and outside of the studio system later in his career?
Well, Orson within the studio system, let's obviously take Citizen Kane 41. It's his most technically rigid, technically astute film that he's made. It's technically consistent. In fact, when you see the opening sequence with the with Rosebud and the snow globe rolling down and shattering and so forth. Not to use a cliche in the bohemian world and such, but it is lyrical, it's poetic, it's just kind of like this perfect masterpiece of cinematic lyricism. I mean, the cinematography, the shots, they all flow seamlessly together. So Citizen Kane is his most intact film, and when you go outside the studio system, there is, you could call it a little bit of shoddy work, a little, but I think that it has merit in that kind of quality, that quality of unevenness. It's kind of exciting,
Mm-hmm.
and there may even be a reason for it. I don't know, whether it's just a technical malpractice or aesthetic intent, but it's enjoyable nonetheless, and it's invigorating. So thank you.
Okay. There does seem to be an air of both unfinishedness in projects that are considered and there's dispute among some film scholars about certain films which are considered complete by some people and by other people to be incomplete and butchered by other people. But even films that are indisputably complete, there does seem to be this indecisiveness, like of what you're talking about. The Stranger seems to have that, like these different flowing currents of styles of filmmaking that can't quite decide what they are, and some of his other works seem to have that as well flowing through them, where they have a shot system that continues for a while, then all of a sudden abruptly ends, and a whole different style of shooting or a different style of filmmaking or a different style of storytelling seems to come up. Also is the fact that he prefers non-linear storytelling in some sense, and if he doesn't go for straightforward non-linear, he likes disjointed narrative. He likes to sort of attack the viewer in some sort of sense, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that in terms of whether I'm correct in that statement or not.
Well, you'd have to break it down. I mean, obviously on one hand you have Macbeth, which is linear, that adheres basically to the Shakespeare structure. Now Citizen Kane, of course, is renowned because it's told in retrospective, a lot of it, so that would fall under the category of disjointed narrative flow and so forth. I don't think I agree with you on you're saying that basically within a film there are these abrupt tangents or these different paths that are chosen to complete the film, and I don't, unless you could cite something specific, I wouldn't readily agree with that. I think that The Stranger is quite consistent. He was kind of like a hired hand on it. I think it was, if I might be incorrect on this, but Edward G. Robinson, when he signed on, assumed that Wells was also going to direct, and I think that the studio said, oh well, we got to have this guy direct and not upset the star, and I think that may have been the case. So The Stranger, I think that's Republic Pictures. It's a studio pick. And it's consistent, man. And one of, again, we were talking about this, it's ridiculous that film scholars and certain criticism is allowed on The Stranger to say, well, hey, this is not a good film, which is completely ridiculous. I said it's a good film, you said it was a great film. I agree with both analysis. It is a great film.
What is your take on Touch of Evil, a very widely regarded film? Some people consider it a greater film to Citizen Kane in some regards. I don't know that I would go that far, but I definitely consider both the unfinished cut and the, I wouldn't call it recent, but within the last 20 years, there have been 2 restored prints and cuts of it that have been released. What's your take on this film, all versions?
And just to begin with the latter, I'm not exactly sure if those are actually completely restored to Wells's vision, because I think there was missing elements and
to the best that they could, to the best of their ability. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm reading actually his notes on that, all the notes to how Touch of Evil was to be assembled, and it's pretty fascinating. What exactly, again, is the question? I'm sorry, Gabe.
Just what's your take on Touch of Evil?
Versus Citizen Kane,
or just independently as a film?
Well, Touch of Evil is great film noir, for one, and obviously, for those who don't know, it has that emblematic opening shot, that long continuous take, and which has been emulated, obviously, in the player, Robert Altman. He played on that, and there's another film or two that try to pay homage, or mimic that opening tracking, seamless. But I think there's a break in it. Actually, there's a cut in it, possibly. I don't know.
There's a special effect in the middle, but it's done so fluidly that it appears seamless. Another film that sort of did an homage to it, but used a special effect in cutting, was The Birdcage. Actually, Mike Nichols, in that opening shot where it comes off of the ocean, and it goes, and it slowly comes over the ocean, and it tracks down, and then it comes onto from the sea, and it goes into the club, and it follows people. When asked about why did you choose this really technically bold shot that's kind of unnecessary in this kind of simple remake of La Cage aux Folles, he goes, well, it's just a grand idea, and Orson did it so well in Touch of Evil, I wanted to do something like that.
Wow, excellent.
And it truly is. There's so many elements of Touch of Evil that have inspired filmmakers, both renowned and already established and aspiring, to...
also De Palma does, he pays homage to that too with maybe Snake Eyes or so, with a huge
tracking shot. Oh my God, it just goes on and on and on, and it's the only thing I really love about that movie, actually.
Oh no, that's a good, that film has its merits. It's a good film for what it is. Touch of Evil, just great, seedy film noir. Marlena Dietrich and Janet Leigh and Anthony Perkins. Tony Perkins. One thing with Touch of Evil. No, I got a cough, dude.
That's okay.
How are we going to do this?
We just do it.
Gabe, I like your simplicity. I love it. And thank you, Zav, for having a friendly smile there. One thing that I noticed, think about compare Touch of Evil and Psycho. First of all, they both have Janet Leigh. Second of all, the motel clerk.
Yep.
Anthony Perkins in Psycho is a skinny, fidgety, nervous motel clerk. Touch of Evil, Dennis Weaver, skinny, timid, fidgety. Whoa. When I've read Psycho by Robert Bloch, the novel, and in it is a short, stocky motel clerk, nothing like the Perkins character. So obviously Hitchcock read the novel, so on and so forth, by Robert Bloch. So did he get the idea potentially to cast Anthony Perkins based on Dennis Weaver in Touch of Evil, because they're both slim, fidgety motel. It's just too on the money. And Janet Leigh also being in Touch of Evil and being in Psycho, there's that stunning parallelity.
I think Hitchcock probably saw greatness and dollar signs when he saw Touch of Evil and thought, man, if I can just, because Hitchcock was a master of marketing.
Well, also now Touch of Evil, now color's starting to come in. This is the late 50s. Hitchcock chooses to shoot in black and white. Touch of Evil is obviously remarkably black and white as well. So you don't know the hidden influence or the outright influence. That goes to the grave. Who knows?
What's your take on Orson Welles sort of becoming this grotesque physical animal later in his life, and how people parodied this, and how people sort of
Gabe, my man liked to eat, dude. That's fact. Okay. No, he liked a good life. He always had good dinners. You know, that's well documented. Good friends surrounding him during those dinners, and also, you know, that was. Now you just made a homage to the bottle off screen there.
I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, Paul Masson. He there you go. And no, he was a connoisseur of food, and that's how we got that way.
Okay. I just so respect the way that he portrays himself as this grotesque animal in Touch of Evil.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's really unflattering, and it's great.
Dude, that's it's film noir at its height. It's sleazy. It's sweaty, as you say. It's grotesque. It's just essential noir, man.
What is your take on? I mean, because those are the more well-known Orson Welles films. Is there anything that you'd like to tell our audience about lesser-known Orson Welles films that they should check out?
Oh, absolutely.
Like the absolute. If they were going to check out 2 other Orson Welles films that they probably haven't heard of, which would you say are the 2 definitive other Welles films?
I mean, you could say The Trial and F for Fake. F for Fake is deliriously beautiful with his longtime partner Hoya Kadar in his latter years, for the latter couple decades. It's just a sensuous film, visually, thematically. It's a winner. F for Fake, and I consider that almost to be my favorite Welles film, even above Citizen Kane. But now Citizen Kane again is it's monumental. It really is. Okay, so we're talking to The Trial. That's very dreamlike, and it's so beautifully filmed, and so on and so forth. But I would. So there's 2, but I mean, I love I love Lady from Shanghai and Macbeth and Othello. Mr. Arcadian, or Mr. Arcadian, however you want to put it, Confidential Report. I've seen all 3 versions of it, yet I really have to see it again because I have a very blank memory about it. I think that may have been his most palest film, his least memorable, possibly. But Macbeth, hey man, go check that out. That's good stuff as well, man.
I would have to say personally, as someone who hasn't seen all of Orson Welles' films, both as an actor or as a director, Macbeth left a huge impression on me when I was younger. In terms of, and I did some research on it when I was younger, what I call the golden years of IMDb, when it was just information.
My God, Gabe.
And Macbeth really stood out to me as a wonder of low-budget cinema, of a film of limited resources, of true passion, of true violent integrity, and he often called it the like voodoo Macbeth. He called it the like this like he was incorporating sort of these like this world culture. This idea that he had, and was also incorporated from a production which he had done.
Yeah, Macbeth was his first theatrical production.
And incorporating those elements into this film, which, because of the limited budgets to it, he just said, well, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it, and if we're constrained, I'm going to put all my money into creating a sort of a surrealist, very impressionistic set. And I just, in terms of low-budget filmmaking from that era, there's nothing more that I love than a great set and some great lighting and some great acting and some just fierce intelligence, even if there's no money behind it.
Yeah, well, when I think about Macbeth, first of all, the sad part of this little exchange we're having is that I have a wonderful copy of it on VHS, and I just could not put my finger on it. I've seen it at least a couple times, and I wanted to reacquaint myself with it before the show. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. When we start talking about Macbeth, you know what? How influenced were filmmakers by Carl Theodore Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc? It is so stunning in its imagery that I really, what is the impact? What impact did it have on Welles? He had to have seen it. I mean, unless you could tell, just a standout silent film, The Passion of Joan of Arc.
I would say in terms of editing, cinematography, and impressionistic filmmaking, I'd say it's up there. It's still in Sight and Sound's poll cited as one of the top 5 films of influence among filmmakers
Thank you.
and film enthusiasts. Citizen Kane being right on that list as well in terms of editing, cinematography, and filmmaking. The fluency of it, the passion of it, and the emotion in it. I mean, it's a startlingly modern film in its movement. It never looks kind of stilted or jagged like some silent films can.
Right.
It feels utterly fresh and modern every time I watch it, and it's just an utterly remarkable film.
No, wait a second. I want to just a little bit tangential movement here.
Oh, sure.
Is that take for instance like D.W. Griffith's Broken Blossoms, heralded as this great film. Yeah, it's great cinematography, but you're cutting back. You have establishing shots, you have close-ups, and then you're cutting back to establishing shots again in the same scene. And it's like, wait a second, this is not how you make impactful, voluptuous films that keep
I have to
moving.
agree with you.
And that's why it's important when you say The Passion of Joan of Arc that it's very aware of its continuum. It doesn't retrograde. It doesn't move back, whereas like something like Broken Blossoms just does not. I know it's an earlier film, but that's still no excuse. So I just want to point that out.
I really dislike Griffith's film language as it's described. I find his filmmaking boring and tedious. I feel that Orson Welles and Dreyer and Kubrick actually have constructed more of a film language than Griffith. In terms of film textbook, you could say that Griffith created the three standard shots of filmmaking. Who cares? I want passion and violence, emotional violence, and I want things that move me. And to teach me things that are just so studiously boring, like Griffith, I just found nauseatingly boring in film school. Orson Welles, and that brings up an interesting point, because I'm thinking in my head as you're talking about Griffith, Orson Welles goes completely against the grain of what Griffith stood for. He was unafraid to do things that were just very different and uncomfortable. Some of those deep focus wide shots that are so disorientating, I mean, it's really intense cinema that sort of rewrote some of the language of film.
Well, I think that he and not exploit in a bad way, exploit as in he used a certain number of techniques and people actually before him, filmmakers actually used, there was deep focus before him,
Absolutely.
There were ceilings and sets before him and all of that stuff. It was such an intense amalgamation of all these elements that Wells brought into Citizen Kane that it was recognized as this kind of like explosion on this scene where these elements did exist in various forms in previous films, and I see a microphone being bandied about.
Well, this is Zav, and I've been mainly silent most of the time, but
Now you're pissed.
now I gotta like say it out. No, actually, I don't have a whole lot to add, because both of you have so much more. You're much more immersed in the work of Orson Welles. Even though I've seen, quite a few of his films, I don't feel as much able to speak about it, but I did have a question. I spent a lot of time recently looking at Cassavetes, and I wonder, do you see a parallel between Orson Welles and John Cassavetes at all, in the sense that they both came out of the studio system? They were actors who became directors, who sort of redefined cinema because they were sort of ostracized from the studio system?
I don't know so much if they were I mean, technically they were ostracized, but I think like Cassavetes' momentum, it wasn't a matter of being ostracized.
Right, actually, what I mean, it was more they rejected the system, perhaps.
Because of their own
certainly,
impulses,
right, that they were artists and they were auteurs. I mean, isn't Orson Welles sort of one of the first auteur filmmakers? Yeah. Should we say that? I don't know. Is that something people say?
Yeah. Yeah, I think potentially for narrative. I mean, obviously in the 20s you had the surrealists were definitely taking their own stance on things. So they were obviously the Dali and Buñuel and that. They were hardcore auteurs, but that was kind of like outside the realm of a standard narrative, which Wells always remained within, comprehensible filmmaking,
Right, and also they're Europeans, and in a certain sense, European cinema has always been outside of the Hollywood system by. It's implicit that they would be outside of the Hollywood system.
Isn't it? It's the French that filmed actualities when in the very first when cinema began, they would film. I believe it was French that would film more or less real events, and we would started going toward like the Great Train Robbery,
Right,
and so
or the parallel
constructing
editing.
narratives.
Yes, yeah.
So that so the French New Wave is kind of like a reiteration of their first footprints in cinema. They were, hey, it's the man back on the streets documenting verite, real life, all that kind of stuff. So. In Cassavetes, man, well, that's a whole different show, man.
Well, what I'm thinking is,
But you're right.
This occurred to me when you were talking about, at the beginning of our discussion about how Orson Welles moved out of the system, and because of it, because he didn't really fit into the system, he created a new genre of cinema in a sense, or he opened up cinema for the world in a new direction, by virtue of the fact that he was no longer part of the system, but he still had the ability to make great films, and I feel like there's something parallel with him and Cassavetes in that sense.
Yeah, I think that film students back in the great, at the advent of film school in the 60s and 70s, I think Welles was hero worshipped. And in fact, if you watch Dennis Hopper's The American Dreamer, the documentary on Hopper when he was cutting the last movie, in Taos, he was a worshiper of Orson Welles. So I think there was that whole mentality. I think that other people did similar things, but I think Orson Welles was really the prodigal son that did all of that, everything like that. So I think you're absolutely right, Sam, that he was the one that they looked for inspiration. I think just absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to add, and I think maybe this comes from the privilege of being, someone who entered the world of cinema or cinema studies in the late 80s or mid 80s, that at that point in the world of film, it was harder for me personally to see the value of Orson Welles, where perhaps a generation earlier he was a huge breath of fresh air for filmmakers and people who wanted to indulge in the practice of making cinema, where we were, by the time I was learning about Orson Welles, I was a little confused. I've always been a little confused as to why Citizen Kane is considered such, given such high accolades, and I've always been a little confused as to why Orson Welles' films are considered so cutting edge, but I think sometimes you don't understand how important something is when you're not living in that time period, or if you're not steeped in the cinema of that time period, and then able to see what he did, what difference he made. I just took it for granted, But I'm listening to you guys. I'm starting to understand maybe why Citizen Kane stood out so much, and why Orson Welles made such a huge difference in cinema.
Well, we got to actually backtrack a little bit as well. And thank you, Zav, because that is actually beautiful what you said. He had some baggage with him. He had some magnificent baggage with him. He carried with him to Hollywood the aura, the hoopla, the aura, everything around the War of the Worlds broadcast from Sunday night, October 30th, 38. Welles and John Houseman, they created the Mercury Theater on the Air, and it began in the summer of 38. First production was Dracula. By October, they had the War of the Worlds on their hand, and it made, it was a national media frenzy, all of that stuff, and it, scared the living daylights literally out of a lot of people thinking there was a Mars invasion. So Welles already had that luster of this Gabe's favorite word, whatever. It was anarchy. He was the king of anarchy at that point, upsetting the nation with this radio broadcast. And so by the time he goes to Hollywood, he's already famous for that. Not only that, he does the Shadow Radio program in 37, a wildly successful film. So Welles is already wildly successful at this point, and all eyes are on him. That's what got him to Hollywood, basically, is this notoriety. And so he's already kind of a media star at the time of Citizen Kane. And then with Citizen Kane, like I said, he brings in all of these filmic elements, all together for one big show, and bam. And now another thing too, with Citizen Kane is his conflict with William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate. And, that was Hearst said, you're not advertising in my newspapers because you've mocked my wife in the film. And not only that, he wanted to give RKO like $1 million or so, whatever, to destroy the negative, destroy all prints of Citizen Kane. So Citizen Kane had this huge deal going with it as well. In the media, he took on Hearst, the biggest newspaper guy, and so it was this whole incredible debacle on top of it. So Citizen Kane had all of these elements, all of this going at the same time. So it would be hard to forget.
What are your feelings on his private life?
Well, first of all, what's amazing is his private life and his work life, I think, are so enmeshed. For one, when you study Wells, this guy's working all the time. This guy's writing projects all the time. This guy's he was bouncing from one radio. He'd almost literally run down the hallway, open another door, and be in another radio show and just grab the script.
Across the country.
Yeah, if you look at what he's actually done, it's incredible. So all of this garbage about uncompleted films, the guy was passionate. He was taking on these projects. He run out of money. Well, that's life, He wanted to complete everything. He had his hands in so many different cookie jars and so on. It's just incredible. Take a look at what he did. It's amazing. He wasn't like a filmmaker sitting around waiting for another script. He put himself in his own ring all the time.
Is there a biopic about Orson Welles out there? I feel like I know.
Well, there's like
Billy Zane. There's the one about the making of RKO 271. About the making of Citizen.
It's kind of vulgar. Boy, there are a lot of potty mouth stuff in that. And there's Me and Orson Welles by Richard Linklater.
Yes.
And Welles comes off as a jerk in that.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't there, but he's not cast in the best light. I think it's RKO 281.
281, you're right. And there's one other one as well where there's the
Cradle of Rock.
Cradle of Rock, and then there's also the Peter Bogdanovich film about the murder that took place on the yacht. No, never mind. He's not in that. Chaplin's in that. I'm sorry, that is not him. But
I don't like that 2-minute signals off.
He's been shown pretty ugly in. Not very flatteringly in film for the most part that I've ever seen.
That's not cool, because this is a good guy with a good heart doing his thing, and to be put in just for dramatic sake in a negative light, that's wrong.
Because that isn't. Those aren't the reports that I've heard. I've heard that a lot of that is sort of cast by circumstance, by that he was demanding, he was intense, and he had sometimes a violent temper because he knew what he wanted.
Hey, have you ever listened to some of the outtakes from his commercials? Those are hilarious. You're right. He probably could have been, probably was a horse's ass to a lot of people, and just really belligerent, but it's all in good fun, I hope, at the end of the day.
So we've been talking with Mark Borchardt about Orson Welles, the one, the only Orson Welles, and the one, the only Mark Borchardt. This has been amazing, interesting. Thank you so much, Mark. This has been great, and I hope that everyone listening enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed giving our interview.
Gabe and Zav, thank you.
Zav LaPlay, thank you very much for your comments and criticism as well, and input. And this is the end of the interview. Thank you.
Okay, so that was the end of the interview, and this is basically supposed to be the end of the show. We've reached midnight, but we decided that we still had more to talk about with Orson Welles. We were still we left some stones unturned, and Mark had more to say. So so we decided to just continue the show, and we were going to do it next week or like in another edition of My Dinner with Gabe, but then we decided, why don't we just run the rest of this? So here's the rest of the interview. It lasts another 10 minutes or so.
This is part 2 of our interview with Mark Borchardt about the one, the only Orson Welles. So, continuing. There are many, many films by Orson Welles, many projects, both theatrical and on the stage, which came to be, and there are many that came to not be. Let's shed some light to our audience who might not know about the projects that possibly did not come to be.
Yeah, and I just want to preface this by saying I want to thank Zav, because Zav, I made a comment when the tape stopped that when are we going to talk about Orson Welles, which was a little comedic aside. So this is actually an impromptu second half, and I know that Gabe is introducing this very seriously, as it should be, but I also want to say that this second segment exists for two reasons: for an ongoing passion about the subject, and Zav also stood his ground and said, hey, we have the ability to tape it now, let's do it, man. And so thank you, Zav, and Gabe, thank you.
Absolutely.
And now, to pick up the mantle, which was dropped about 50 seconds ago about incomplete films, we'll do 3 titles: Don Quixote, The Deep, and The Other Side of the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
And The Deep is, alternate title is Dead Reckoning. Actually, Don Quixote, filmmaker Jess Franco completed a version in '92. This is Wells's footage and so forth that I guess he assembled, and you can scrounge it up. It's for Wells aficionados only. That's all I'll say. Have you seen it, Gabe?
I have not.
Zav?
How is it titled? What is?
Don Quixote.
Oh, it's called Don Quixote.
Cervantes.
Oh, and it's Wells' version, or?
Yeah,
okay.
He went ahead and shot it. That's why we're talking about
Because
it.
isn't there a whole lore about Don Quixote that whenever a director tries to make the film, it doesn't really
You're
fail?
talking about Terry Gilliam, my friend.
Well, no, but supposedly many directors have tried and failed to make this film.
No, please, Gabe.
There have been several incomplete projects, but most notably, yes, is Terry Gilliam, in which there is a documentary made about the subject, which is a very entertaining film about the pitfalls of the Hollywood system, about Lost in La Mancha, about outsiders trying to exist within a system of corporations and corporate structure, and how a film can just implode on itself so quickly by circumstance and by curse. So, Don Quixote, your take on Orson Welles' constructed cut in 1992, and on maybe the reasons why it was incomplete, or what happened that led to its incompleteness.
Well, it's go see the '92 assemblage. It's for Wells fans only, and it's pretty. I won't swear here, but it's pretty ridiculous. It's a travesty, and there's actually some shots with Wells in it, actually filming in Spain on the streets of Madrid, maybe perhaps or so. So it's a mixed bag of content as well. But see it at your own risk.
Is that due to the reassemblage or just his filmmaking?
Well, there's I think a fairly goofy soundtrack, a voice track actually. That it's just okay.
I mean, we'll leave that one in there.
That's going to actually be my wrap up.
We'll leave that one there. Okay, The Deep.
Yeah, that takes place out in the ocean. It's color, and you can see clips of it. Actually, there's a documentary called Orson Welles' One Man Band, I believe. And Orson Welles was lucky because he had, in 1970, he got acquainted with his own personal cinematographer, Gary Graver. Yeah, Welles died in '85, so he had Graver's friendship and assistance for 15 years, and so they would embark on projects. I don't know if it encompassed The Deep, if The Deep was the late 60s or so forth, but surely The Other Side of the Wind. But anyway, the one thing that we could concentrate on is The Other Side of the Wind. Now, there's a lot of footage of that, actually in Munich, at the Film Museum in Munich. I think they're the ones who actually hold all the footage. There might actually be a pretty decent assemblage of The Other Side of the Wind. It's John Huston plays Jake Hannaford, this filmmaker, and Peter Bogdanovich is also in it, and also Joseph McBride is in it. Now, Joseph McBride has written this wonderful book, and I believe the title is Whatever Happened to Orson Welles. I read it, and it spends a delicious amount of time on the set out in the Southwest with with the Wells shooting The Other Side of the Wind. It's just a remarkable book. Whatever happened to Orson Welles, I believe, or whatever became of Orson Welles. I don't use the internet that much, so I didn't, and plus the book was on another shelf, but it's one of those two titles by Joseph McBride. It's a great book, man. Speaking of books, and Peter Bogdanovich, this is Orson Welles. A great, just a beautiful book-length interview with Orson Welles by Peter Bogdanovich. This is Orson Welles. Great book, guys.
Also adding to that is David Thompson's definitive biography on Orson Welles, which is very critical but also very exclamatory and very inquisitive and very pondering, very philosophical. David Thompson, having a very sort of pompous British air about himself, is very immersed in himself in his style of investigating Orson Welles, but it's I haven't finished the book because it's annoying, but it's for extreme Welles fans and extreme Welles enthusiasts. Also, his entry in Orson Welles' entry in David Thompson's biographical dictionary of film is absolutely maddening in its indecisiveness of what his opinion on Welles and his work is, though Citizen Kane is listed to this day as David Thompson's favorite film.
I've read a kinder biography by Barbara Leeming, which came out in '85. And it was, I have yet to read the David Thompson one, and there's a few more certainly to tackle. Gary Graver actually also did a wonderful book about his 15-year experience with Orson Welles too. So that it's called Making Movies with Orson Welles. So if you're a Welles fan, that's another book to check out. And what those are, they go beyond the general biography of the old life encompassing one, but. You guys are having a riot back there, and I don't know.
I'm just having such a great time here. This is just great.
But, okay, so, I mean, beyond the typical biographies, get the Joseph McBride one, get the Gary Graver one. Those are far more specific and intimate portraits of their relationship with him.
Personal relationships, which is what I've heard is a great legacy of Orson Welles. It was his interpersonal relations with people. Was that this was a guy who was so passionate that, yes, there were relationships that fell apart as an expense of that, but there were also great relationships made as a result of that. But even these great relationships that were made, they seem to be only for a certain amount of time, like for 10-year increments, 15-year increments, and then all of a sudden there just seems to be a cutoff to some of these. I'm wondering if that's a pattern, if you've noticed that as well.
Well, he's never lacked for dinner companions. That's been duly noted, and I think he's had some fine dining experiences.
With Paul, my son.
Right, there you go. But I have to actually make a contrarian effort on that, because as I said, with his couple-decade relationship with Oya Kadar to the end, was she an artist in her own right? I believe she was Croatian, and you've got to see Orson Welles' one-man band and how she is the curator of his work, the curator of his legacy is just incredible. And I think we're being told something that the tape is now. We're doing this actually on reel to reel, which is magnificent.
Which is amazing.
And Zav really went out of his way to set this up, I want to say, and I want to thank him for that.
Actually, I'm sorry. I just suddenly realized that we are running out of tape, and but we're not. We still have a couple more minutes. But I do want to say that the part of the story behind today's interview was that I had a Zoom recorder all ready to go, and Didier was kind enough to set us up in his music studio, which is downstairs below the radio station, and when it came time to do the interview, I couldn't find the Zoom recorder, and as far as I can tell, it was stolen. And so I had to I was pulling out my hair as to how we were going to record this interview today, and Gabe said, well, let's just record it on tape. And I thought, well, I don't have a tape recorder. And then I realized, yes, I do. I have a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And so we're recording this on quarter-inch reel-to-reel, which is pretty old school, maybe kind of an ode to Orson Welles in a way. I guess anyone from before the digital era. But it's really kind of fun. And so this has been a great interview, and I'm sorry that it's getting cut short because the tape stock is rolling out. But I think it's been very informative for me, and I hope it's been as worthwhile to the both of you as well.
Certainly, Zach.
Thank you so much. This has been informative and entertaining, and I hope that to all of our listeners, it is the same. So,
I just wanted to ask Mark, one last word on Orson Welles. We still have about a half a minute or something. Any last thing that you'd want to just kind of wrap it up with?
Check out his radio dramas. Check out his appearances on Suspense, on the radio anthology Suspense, which lasted for 20 years. Wells does a magnificent job in The Hitchhiker, and there's other episodes. The Most Dangerous Game, I think, was Mercury Theater on the Air, or Suspense. Check those out. They're just great.
thank you very much. This has been Mark Borchardt speaking with Zab LaPlay and Gabe Van Handel about Orson Welles. We'll see you next week. Thanks.